Have you ever been moving through an ordinary day when a quiet, unsettling question suddenly surfaces? Why am I doing all of this? What is this really for? That moment when familiar explanations collapse, when the life story you inherited no longer feels convincing. Philosophy begins exactly there, at the edge of that internal silence. Here at Stoic Lighthouse, we don't chase quick fixes or comforting illusions. We seek clarity, direction, and steadiness in a world that often feels unstable. Across history, humanity has built two very different bridges to cross this abyss. One was shaped by discipline, reason, and duty. It claims the universe is ordered, intelligible, and purposeful. Meaning is not invented. It is lived through alignment with something greater than oneself. The other was built through defiance, freedom, and responsibility. It claims the universe is silent and indifferent. Meaning is not found, it is forged, choice by choice, without guarantees. On one side stands Stoicism, on the other, Existentialism. Both philosophies emerge in moments of crisis. Both speak to people who refuse to live on autopilot. Yet their answers to the same questions could not be more opposed. Today we place these two worldviews face to face, not to decide which is superior, but to understand what kind of strength each one demands. Because the philosophy you lean on in moments of uncertainty quietly shapes the way you live every ordinary day. Number 1. Order or silence. The universe and the human condition. At the deepest level, the conflict between Stoicism and Existentialism begins with a single question. What kind of universe are we living in? For the Stoic, the answer is demanding, but strangely reassuring. This is not a random or meaningless cosmos. It is an ordered whole, a living system governed by reason, coherence, and necessity. The Stoics called this rational structure the logos. Nothing exists in isolation. Every event, from the movement of stars to the rise and fall of human lives, unfolds according to this underlying order. To the Stoic mind, chaos is not proof of meaninglessness. It is proof of limited perspective. Epictetus pointed to this hidden coherence when he reflected on human reason itself. Epictetus warned, if the universe were not governed by reason, how could we possess reason at all? From this view, the human condition is not one of abandonment. We are not strangers in a hostile world. We are fragments of the same rational structure that governs everything else. Our task is not to demand meaning from life, but to live in accordance with it. This is why Stoicism places such emphasis on acceptance. Not passive resignation, but intelligent alignment. The Stoic does not ask whether the universe is fair. He asks whether his response is rational, disciplined, and worthy of his role within it. Existentialism begins from a radically different starting point. For the existentialist, the universe offers no answers, no plan, no inherent order. It is silent, indifferent, and unmoved by human longing. Meaning is not hidden. It simply does not exist. Albert Camus captured this collision between our hunger for meaning and the universe's refusal to provide it. Albert Camus reflected, the absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. This silence changes everything. If there is no cosmic order, then there is no path to align with, no nature to obey, no objective meaning waiting to be discovered. The human being stands alone, facing a vast emptiness, responsible for giving shape to a life without instructions. At this point, something subtle but crucial happens. If this way of seeing life feels familiar, it's because you're not searching for comforting answers. You're trying to live with awareness. This channel exists for exactly that reason. The Stoic sees the universe as a structure to inhabit wisely. The existentialist sees it as a blank space to confront honestly. One offers belonging within a greater whole. The other offers freedom without guarantees. And from this single divergence, everything else follows. How we understand freedom, how we define purpose, how we endure suffering, and ultimately, how we face the certainty of death. Number 2. What is freedom really? Living by nature versus being condemned to choose. Once we decide whether the universe is ordered or indifferent, a second question becomes unavoidable. How free are we really? For the Stoic, freedom is not the ability to do whatever one desires. That kind of freedom is an illusion, fragile and easily destroyed by circumstances. True freedom in Stoic thought is internal. It begins the moment we understand what is within our control and what is not. Epictetus made this distinction the foundation of Stoic ethics. Our judgments, intentions, and choices belong to us. Everything else, our reputation, our body, other people, outcomes, does not. Epictetus warned, freedom is not achieved by satisfying desire, but by eliminating it. This does not mean suppressing life or rejecting action. It means directing effort only toward what reason allows us to govern. The Stoic accepts the external script written by fate, not as a prison, but as a stage. Freedom lies in performing one's role with excellence, dignity, and self-command. Seneca, who lived under emperors and constant political danger, understood this distinction deeply. Seneca argued, "No man is free who is a slave to his passions." In this view, freedom is alignment. Like a skilled musician interpreting a complex composition, the Stoic does not invent the notes. He plays them well. Mastery replaces rebellion. Discipline replaces resentment. Existentialism reverses this entire framework. If the universe has no script, then nothing assigns us a role. There is no given nature, no predefined essence, no moral structure embedded in reality itself. Human beings exist first, and only later define who they are. Jean-Paul Sartre expressed this with brutal clarity. Jean-Paul Sartre declared, "Man is condemned to be free." Condemned because there is no escape from choice. Even refusing to choose is a choice. Every action shapes who we become, and there is no external authority to blame, no fate to appeal to, no nature to hide behind. Freedom here is absolute, and that absoluteness carries weight. Responsibility becomes total. There is no cosmic order to absorb our failures or justify our decisions. Meaning must be created through action alone. This is why existential freedom produces anxiety, not as a flaw, but as a signal. The vertigo of standing before infinite possibility with no guidance. Modern thinkers like Mark Manson echo this idea in contemporary language. Mark Manson explains, when you realize that nothing has inherent meaning, you become responsible for creating meaning yourself. The Stoic says, you are free when you accept what you cannot change and govern yourself. The Existentialist says, you are free because nothing governs you at all. One path leads to tranquility through limits. The other leads to intensity through responsibility. And the tension between them forces a difficult question. Do we want freedom as stability or freedom as burden? Number 3. Why are you here? Virtue or the burden of creating meaning? Once freedom is defined, the question that inevitably follows is the most personal of all. Why are you here? For the Stoic, the answer is neither vague nor negotiable. Life has a purpose, and that purpose is virtue. To live well is to live in accordance with reason, to align one's character with the rational structure of reality itself. Happiness, pleasure, success, and recognition are not goals. They are unstable byproducts, dependent on forces outside our control. Virtue, by contrast, belongs entirely to us. It is the only good that cannot be taken away. Musonius Rufus treated philosophy not as theory, but as daily practice. Musonius Rufus taught, a life without philosophy is a sickness of the soul. Virtue, in the Stoic sense, is not moral perfection, it is consistency, the disciplined effort to act with justice, courage, temperance, and wisdom regardless of circumstance. Meaning is not something we search for, it emerges from how we live. Existentialism begins from the opposite conclusion. If the universe has no built-in purpose, then life offers no predefined meaning. There is nothing to discover. Meaning must be constructed, imposed, and sustained through choice alone. Albert Camus explored this condition through the myth of Sisyphus. Albert Camus concluded, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart." Sisyphus is condemned to roll a stone up a mountain forever, only to watch it fall again. There is no progress, no reward, no final victory. Yet Camus insists that meaning is born the moment Sisyphus becomes conscious of his condition and continues anyway. Not out of hope, but out of defiance. This is the existential stance. Life has no objective purpose, but that does not excuse despair. It demands authorship. Each choice becomes a declaration of values in a world that offers none. Viktor Frankl, reflecting on extreme suffering, arrived at a similar insight through experience rather than abstraction. Viktor Frankl wrote, "Those who have a why to live can endure almost any how." The Stoic and the existentialist meet here in an unexpected way. One grounds meaning in alignment with reason and virtue. The other grounds meaning in conscious commitment and responsibility. Both reject passivity. Both insist that a life without intention collapses into emptiness. The difference lies in where meaning originates, discovered through order or created through will. And that distinction reshapes not only how we live, but how we suffer. Number 4, how to face suffering, inner calm or existential anguish. No philosophy can avoid this question for long. What do we do with suffering? Pain, loss, frustration, and uncertainty are not exceptions in human life. They are constants. What separates philosophies is not whether they acknowledge suffering, but how they interpret it. For the Stoic, most suffering is not caused by events themselves, but by the judgments we attach to them. External circumstances may be difficult, but emotional torment arises when we label them as intolerable, unfair, or catastrophic. This is why Stoicism aims at apatheia, not emotional numbness, but freedom from irrational passions. Emotions that overpower reason are seen as distortions of perception, not truths to obey. Chrysippus, the great systematizer of Stoic thought, framed suffering in precise terms. Chrysippus taught, "Suffering is the irrational contraction of the soul." The Stoic response is not suppression, but examination. When anxiety or despair appears, it is brought before reason and questioned. Is this reaction aligned with reality? Does this event truly threaten what is good? Or is it challenging something indifferent? Through this process, suffering loses its absolute authority. Serenity becomes possible, not because life is painless, but because the mind no longer adds unnecessary weight to what fate already provides. Existentialism approaches suffering from an entirely different angle. For the existentialist, anguish is not a mistake in reasoning. It is evidence, proof of freedom. If there are no fixed meanings, no predetermined values, then every choice carries responsibility without reassurance. Anguish emerges from standing alone before that responsibility. Søren Kierkegaard was the first to describe this experience with clarity. Søren Kierkegaard wrote, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. This dizziness cannot be cured without abandoning freedom itself. To eliminate anguish would require pretending that our choices do not matter, that we are merely following scripts or roles imposed from outside." Sartre called this escape bad faith. From the existential perspective, anguish must be faced, not erased. It is the price of authenticity. Rollo May later expanded this insight into psychological terms. Rollo May argued, Anxiety is not the enemy of life. It is the signal that life is asking something of us. Here, suffering becomes raw material, not something to neutralize, but something to transform. Creativity, commitment, and meaning arise precisely because there is no safety net. The Stoic seeks peace by dissolving irrational suffering through reason. The existentialist seeks dignity by enduring anguish without illusions. One aims for inner calm, the other accepts inner tension as the cost of freedom. Both reject collapse. Both demand strength, but they disagree on whether suffering is a flaw to be corrected or a condition to be confronted. And this difference becomes sharpest when suffering reaches its ultimate boundary. Number 5. Staring at the end, Memento Mori versus the final absurd. Every serious philosophy eventually collides with the same certainty. You will die. How we understand this fact silently determines how we live. For the Stoic, death is not an enemy. It is not a punishment, nor a tragedy imposed by fate. It is a natural event, woven into the same rational order that governs birth, growth, and decay. To fear what is natural is to misunderstand reality. This is why Stoicism returns constantly to a simple practice, Memento Mori. Remember that you will die, not to create dread, but to restore proportion. When death is kept in view, trivial concerns lose their grip. Vanity weakens, resentment softens. What remains is urgency directed toward what actually matters: character, action, and virtue. Epictetus expressed this discipline with stark clarity. Epictetus advised, "Keep death before your eyes each day, and you will never think or act in petty ways." Death, for the Stoic, becomes a teacher. It reminds us that time is finite, and that the only thing truly ours is how we choose to live within it. When the end comes, nothing essential is lost, because nothing essential was ever external. Existentialism approaches death from a darker, more unsettling angle. If the universe has no inherent meaning, then death is not a transition within an order. It is the final confirmation of absurdity. Every project ends, every story is interrupted, every meaning we construct is eventually erased. Yet this very finality transforms life. Martin Heidegger described human existence as being toward death. Martin Heidegger argued, only by facing death as a personal and unavoidable possibility does life become authentic. Death strips away distraction. It exposes the fragility of borrowed values and inherited routines. Knowing that time will end forces a confrontation with how it is being used. Here, death does not offer comfort, it offers intensity. If nothing lasts, then each choice matters precisely because it will never happen again. Meaning does not survive death, but it becomes sharper because of it. Modern thinkers have noticed a convergence here. Both the Stoic and the existentialist use death as a wake-up call. One uses it to reinforce duty within a rational order. The other uses it to ignite responsibility within a meaningless universe. The conclusions sound similar, but the foundations are not. The Stoic looks at death and feels calm acceptance. The existentialist looks at death and feels defiant clarity. One says, live well because you are part of something larger. The other says, live fully because nothing will save your moment but you. Either way, death demands the same thing from us. Stop postponing life. After crossing both bridges, one built on order and the other on freedom, something becomes clear. Stoicism and existentialism do not disagree because one is shallow and the other profound. They disagree because they begin from different truths about reality. One trusts that meaning exists beyond us. The other accepts that meaning depends entirely on us. Stoicism offers stability. It teaches that peace comes from alignment with reason, acceptance of limits, and commitment to virtue regardless of outcome. It trains the mind to remain steady even when life becomes unpredictable. Existentialism offers intensity. It teaches that meaning is born through conscious choice, responsibility, and the courage to act without guarantees. It refuses comfort in exchange for authenticity. Neither path removes difficulty. Neither promises happiness as a reward. They simply ask different questions of the same human being. Stoicism asks, can you govern yourself within what you cannot control? Existentialism asks, can you take responsibility for who you become without excuses? In the end, both philosophies reject passivity. Both demand presence. Both insist that life lived unconsciously is life wasted. What separates them is where they place the source of meaning, and perhaps that decision reveals more about us than about the universe. In our next reflection, we'll explore how Stoic discipline applies when meaning is tested not by abstract ideas, but by intimacy, commitment, and the strain of everyday relationships. Everything external can collapse, but character remains the final refuge. If this reflection stayed with you, consider subscribing and continuing this journey with our community. Let Stoic Lighthouse guide you toward calm, clarity, and wisdom. Until the next video.